I am more bullish than I've ever been in this crypto market. And to your point, the halving is coming up, the supply is getting cut, right? The rewards, the mining difficulty will increase, but there's more demand for Bitcoin. Before it was the early adopters, the cypherpunks, and so forth, right? Retail. Now Wall Street is here. They want it.
GM, welcome everybody into another Coinage chat here as we have Bitcoin surging past 51,000, briefly topping 52,000 here. An exciting day for all of crypto as we continue to watch the charts, and I'm excited to have on with us today a very important special guest. We've been trying to have him on for a bit. I've been respecting his work from afar for a long time. We've got the founder and host of Thinking Crypto, the podcast, here with us, Tony Edward. Thank you so much for hopping on, man.
It's great to be here. It's a beautiful day. The price of Bitcoin is pumping.
It's wild, man. I mean, the excitement was there. Some fears were there. The Bitcoin ETFs weren't doing what we all thought they might do and bringing in a bunch of money. But now we're back to that theme and watching it all play out before us. And I guess, Tony, you've been covering crypto for a while here. So maybe we'll just start with what you think about where we're at, because the excitement seems like it's on fire right now, man.
Yeah, absolutely. How I love to categorize it is phase one, phase two, and phase three. What do I mean by that? The pre-halving pump, which we saw in 2023, that was phase one. We're in phase two, where you have the halving hype, and then there's going to be a cool down. But in phase three is where the big fireworks happen, where we have the blow up top, where we have euphoria, and I believe that's next year. So we're seeing this having an ETF narrative push the price up. Look, the stock market is also moving up, and there's a high correlation between crypto and the stock market. So it's exciting times. However, I am cautiously optimistic because, once again, we're still in phase two, not in phase three yet.
Yeah, obviously it takes time for some of these things, particularly the Bitcoin ETFs, to kind of even get sold, in terms of having financial advisors tell people about, hey, do you want to allocate to Bitcoin? And that wasn't going to happen overnight, but it has been pretty wild to see the net inflows here as BlackRock chases Fidelity, as all of these little kind of fee wars have played out as these things began trading. For all things considered, and obviously, I guess, money flowing out of Grayscale's GBTC, all things considered, it seemed like a relatively smooth process, and now we're getting into that exciting phase, as you mentioned, kind of how long this stuff takes, to where really I think it might trickle into kind of mainstream America that never really thought about allocating to Bitcoin.
Yeah, look, I think the ETF launches were a huge success. It broke some records. I've been talking to many of the ETF issuers like Bitwise, ARK, and so forth, and the numbers are amazing. You look at just 5 weeks in, I think, or between 4 to 5 weeks, and many of them have already crossed the $1 billion threshold. BlackRock, Fidelity are in the billions. I think ARK just recently crossed $1 billion, and I believe Bitwise might cross $1 billion soon. So we are just, once again, folks, 4 to 5 weeks in. And it's not even the mass marketing, the ramp up of educating RIAs and wealth managers hasn't hit the ground yet, right? There's a crawl, walk, run phase to this. So just imagine a year from now what the AUM is going to look like for these ETFs. So be patient. The marketing will start. The education will start. And remember that, these TradFi folks, they don't move as fast. And this is all still new. But still, it's historic what has taken place so far.
Yeah, and we talk so much about the Bitcoin ETFs, and to be honest, when I step back and think about themes to watch in 2024, I don't know if there's one that seems to be one of the overlooked exciting pieces of this, because that gets the we've seen this before. You get kind of this FOMO hype cycle going on where, all right, money comes in, price goes up, that begets more excitement, and then other people get excited. And some of these themes have happened before in terms of countries allocating to Bitcoin. We've seen what happened in El Salvador, but also tax changes, to me, is one that hasn't really been discussed so much, because there's MicroStrategy, who of course is always really allocated to Bitcoin, but now as some of those rules have changed around the accounting practices, I wonder if more companies might also start allocating. I don't know if you, Tony, have been kind of watching a theme that might be overlooked in the way that so much attention has gone towards these ETFs, but kind of that next phase, as you call it, where you're looking to watch as we move through the year.
Yeah, great point. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's the FASB rules that were updated with how corporations can hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. MicroStrategy, of course. I call Michael Saylor the biggest Bitcoin bull in the history of the world, right? This guy lives, breathes, and eats Bitcoin. He's always buying. But Tesla is still holding Bitcoin. And I do think we will see more companies hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet because of the updated rules. But in addition, you have the signal from Wall Street saying, this is okay, relax. We have the ETFs, we're comfortable with it. Larry Fink is on TV saying, this is a great asset class, it's better than gold. So the psychological barrier of fear and not trusting this thing has been broken down. And that's because of the big names and the ETFs being, that TradFi wrapper that the masses are familiar with. They trust ETFs, they trust these brands. So it's going to make it easy for these corporations to then dip into Bitcoin. I'm anticipating we might see, I don't know, 5 to 6 corporations do it. It's hard to tell. I'm just speculating, but
Hmm.
with the updated rules, I think it's highly possible.
Yeah, you mentioned, I mean, obviously there's a lot of things to get excited about. And even the things that maybe some people were afraid of heading into this year might look a little less scary now, too. Before the show, you and I were talking about some of the legal ramifications tied up in both, what we saw with the Ripple case and now with the SEC versus Coinbase. That one's kind of ongoing and waiting to hear how the judge rules in that. And then there's regulation, I suppose. We were covering on Coinage earlier last week with Perianne Boring talking about some of these stablecoin rule changes that might be coming. She's been calling kind of 2024 an existential threat for crypto this year, just as regulators look at this. And of course, it's a big election year. I mean, I wonder how much of that might be one of the pieces you're watching when it comes to, I guess, some fears, but also, if you believe what we're hearing in Washington, potential changes on the stablecoin front could also create the same inflows we're seeing with the Bitcoin ETFs. If stablecoins get figured out, that's a huge piece of crypto that has been kind of a murky water, so to speak. So I wonder if any politics has changed kind of your expectations for 2024 too.
Yeah, great points that you brought up. Look, I got into this market in 2016. And when I look at where we are at now, I am so bullish and I'm not as fearful as I was years ago when a lot of these things were taboo for corporations to talk about. Governments and politicians were ignoring it. Now there's two bills in the House. Now there's two bills in the Senate, one for the crypto assets, one for stablecoins. So we're headed in the right direction. And I feel we're at the cusp of these things being fully regulated and clear guardrails being put into place. What is the SEC supposed to do? What is the CFTC supposed to do? And we're seeing our allies overseas, such as the UK and the EU, they've already passed their regulations and they're in the process of fine tuning it. So that does put some pressure on the US, not to mention the SEC is taking big losses in court and these are high profile cases. So it's not like, it's some small NFT projects. It's Coinbase, it's Ripple, it's Grayscale. And then you have Wall Street involved with the Bitcoin spot ETF. So this is not good for the SEC and it's a bad look for the government and the Biden administration. Now, I don't want to get too political because, there's people who are saying Biden's going to lose or people who are saying Biden's going to win. What I found that was very interesting last week, Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, who's part of the Biden administration, went before the House and said, we need to pass crypto regulations for spot crypto markets and stablecoins. I was blown away by that because historically, she's only talked negatively about crypto and has not called for regulations. But
Mhm.
she was very clear and distinct as to what she wants Congress to do. So I have a theory. We could potentially see the Biden administration do a 180 on their crypto stance, and that is not follow Elizabeth Warren anymore and Gary Gensler, but actually pass some regulations. And I think it's going to start with stablecoins, to your point, because
Yeah.
they are very scared of stablecoins because they can't view it and control it because they control the money printer. And if fiat is going into stablecoins and being moved globally on blockchains, that is something they are very scared of.
Yeah, and I've been watching too. Maxine Waters, someone who's within that Democratic fold, and a break there in terms of, we heard from Janet Yellen, as you said, and now Maxine Waters saying we could be very, very close to a stablecoin bill. I do think it has been exciting, at least in the short term, to see some of the tides turning, and perhaps, maybe you're right, there could be a break within kind of those ranks of how do we really want to go down this path. and we know where Senator Elizabeth Warren sits with her anti-crypto army. So it is, I think, heading into the election year, potentially something that we should be paying more attention to as we get closer to that election for where some of these high-profile Democrats might be leaning. Tony, I do also want to highlight, so much of what you just said, and I know I don't think neither you nor I really provide financial advice so much, but we do talk about maybe the right way to play some of these things. And when we talk about Bitcoin pumping, it has been pretty interesting to watch. I'm looking at this Reuters article right now talking about US listed crypto firms kind of rising a little bit more than Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's up about 10% over the last 5 days. But you can look at Coinbase's stock up 20% over the last 5 days. You could also look at Bitfarms, one of the big miners, up more than 34% over the last 5 days. And I'm curious, if this is indicative of things that you've seen since you've been covering the space since 2016, if maybe some of these stocks that are attached to crypto pumping even more says anything maybe about the excitement or FOMO cycle that we find ourselves in now.
Yeah, these stocks and these companies are very symbiotic with the crypto asset class. As the assets rise, they often rise as well because many of them hold those said assets, such as Bitcoin and other tokens. So it makes sense. And as the crypto asset class prices rise and more investors come in, it means more revenue is usually generated for the exchanges. So it's a pretty logical, thing that these two would move in parallel. And we've seen it time and time again. When the price goes down, so do the stock prices. So I actually play both sides. I hold Coinbase stock. I hold some Bitcoin mining stock company stocks as well. And I'm diversified, and I'm looking at getting returns where I can, good returns. And I'm holding Coinbase. I believe Coinbase is going to do really well. When I saw BlackRock partnered with them, when I saw that they are custodying, I think, 9 Bitcoin ETF issuer funds, I was like, wow, okay, that's a big, big vote of confidence. And
Yeah.
I think they're going to whoop the SEC's butt in court. And I think it's going to work out well for them.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch that too. Obviously, they report earnings on Thursday. I think it'll be, important to see how the custody fees might play out versus what we've been talking about with the actual fees for buying Bitcoin through the ETFs. A lot of people have been talking about how that might pressure the Coinbases of the world in the fees they charge, because it's become almost cheaper to go through the ETFs to get access to Bitcoin relative to the old way of just holding it yourself. So I don't know. It's a pro con, and we'll see what happens when they report on Thursday. But I also want to call out the great work that you do on your channels, because you get great interviews, man, and great insights coming from the Thinking Crypto podcast to shout out on your appearance on Coinage today. I mean, you just had John Wu, who is president at Avalabs. A very interesting discussion on what they're up to. I was also watching your interview with Prometheum from last week. I mean, you talk to a lot of people, so I guess we talk so much about Bitcoin, but what are you kind of most excited about in this cycle, given you talk to the leaders in this space almost on a daily basis?
Sure. I think the theme that I'm seeing the most of is tokenization. And I think it makes no sense when Larry Fink at BlackRock puts up the signal that, and he goes on TV and he says, tokenization is the future of finance. They're going to put stocks, bonds, real estate, all the TradFi assets on the blockchain. It will be fractionalized. We are headed to a 24/7 market. No more opening and closing bell at the stock market. That's going to be gone. As hard as it is to imagine, it's going to be gone. I'm not saying tomorrow, but it's going to be gone. And there's going to be secondary markets and all types of DeFi capabilities. So many of these blockchains are trying to scale and improve efficiency and lower costs and improve transaction speed, and try to get the institutions to select their blockchains for tokenization. The other aspect is traceability and tracking. So it could be like products, supply chain management and so forth. They're exploring that. There's the NFT customer experience aspect. I spoke to John Wu at Ava Labs and working on Avalanche. They're looking to get more integration with that. So if you walk into Walmart or you buy a product from Amazon, maybe there's a QR code that says continue the experience or unlock experiences by downloading the NFT. The customer journey continues. Brands are able to interact with customers and have more stickiness. So these are the things they're looking at and trying to get more real world use cases in play. It's one thing, you have the speculation layer, you have collectible NFTs, but how do you get real world utility? And many of them, it's a race right now for that.
Yeah, I mean, the race is certainly on this year, and I think about Avalanche as maybe one of those that's overlooked relative to maybe some of the other chains. We talked so much about Solana's run up over the last couple of years, and obviously going from $9 to over 100 for them has been pretty insane. When you look at Avalanche, though, I think it's kind of not exactly seen the same pump relative to Solana, but it's also kind of the sister chain, as I like to call it, right? When we talk about competing layer ones, it's another one in the space. I'm curious to get your take on maybe how some of these chains have been pursuing both the same thing, but then also very different things at the same time. I mean, Avalanche has subnets and kind of what they're trying to build with what you talked about in letting tech partners use the technology that these chains offer if they want that customization or permissioned systems versus a Solana, which is kind of, all about speed. I'm curious, how you look at maybe room to run across these various different projects.
I'm going to give a hot take here. Look, there's a lot of people who love Solana, but I think the price run up is very much has to do with VCs and their big bags. And Solana, I know what they're trying to achieve. They are getting adoption in certain facets. But look, the blockchain went down for 5 hours the other day. That's ridiculous, and that's not a one-time thing. I think the total is 11 times over the past few years. And look, I hold some Sol tokens, but I'm purely holding it for a speculation standpoint. I'm swing trading it. I am not a long term holder because what I see worries me, the blockchain going down. So even though it's getting incredible price appreciation and run ups, I think a lot of that has to do with the VCs speculating. But I will more trust Avalanche, and which has the AVAX token and some other blockchains, which have not gone down. Right, that is so important. But look, speculation exists in every market, every asset class, and I hope people, who are looking for a long-term play, they 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 really do their research and look at the
Hmm.
history and understand the uptime, the downtimes, and all the adoption items, and understand the risk. But short term, look, you can enter in and enter out within a quarter, right, and make a nice swing trade return. I do that for different tokens, but I don't trust Solana long term. I do trust Avalanche more. And look, that could change, right? I'm open to changing and updating my thesis, but as of right now, what I've seen is not good. And here, one of the things that I discussed with John Woo in the interview about Avalanche, JP Morgan
Hmm.
is testing tokenization. They're doing a proof of concept with the Monetary Authority of Singapore on the Avalanche blockchain. I'll take that as a big vote of confidence.
It's true. I mean, Avalanche has really leaned into the idea of kind of, I think, partnering with some of these larger financial players. And when they talk about what their network offers, it has been pretty fascinating to see those partnerships, kind of given how hesitant some of those traditional players have been in touching anything to do with crypto or blockchain. So I think that is pretty fascinating to watch. I'm also curious, you mentioned trading versus investing. And I think that that's such a huge piece of this, too, because crypto moves quick. You can get caught flat-footed. It's very easy. Things can go from 100% to 0% overnight. We saw that with Terra. I'm curious, like, kind of, if someone comes to you, and I'm sure you get asked by friends all the time, if they're like, "Hey,
Sure.
Tony, where do I put? I got $1,000 to invest. How should I break this out?" Like the advice. I worked at CNBC. This 80-20 rule of like stocks bonds is like so far removed from where I think anyone in our generation is now.
Yeah.
Like, what's the advice you give to people if they're like, "Hey, I don't even know where to start. How should I be allocated?" Because if you're just looking for like Bitcoin exposure, you can do that. But how would you advise people to maybe look at things beyond it and think about building a portfolio today?
Yeah, great question. And I've honestly updated my answer over the years because to your point, I have family and friends who ask me about this because they see, look, I made money off crypto. They see the price appreciation. They see the news and media and all of these things, right? So when they come to me and they're newbies, I often say, look, start with Bitcoin. Buy $50 of Bitcoin or $100 of Bitcoin. Move it around, send it to me. I'll send it back to you. Understand how the technology works. And I want you to take 10 hours and research this. Not that this is an investment, but understand the technology. Why is it different? What are the benefits and the pros and the cons and so forth? So I clearly tell them that. And some of them are taken back like, well, 10 hours, you want me to research this? Yes, I want you to be educated about it. So you know what is taking place here. Is as if someone came in 1991 and said, hey, there's this thing called the internet, right? and there's companies building on the internet. You can invest in the stocks, but understand what the internet is and what the capabilities are. So I try to give that analogy. So I often tell them start with Bitcoin, and then I say, look, the next proven asset, which has been around for a while, has some regulatory clarity, is Ethereum. Buy some Ethereum. And everything after that, you have to take your time to do your research and understand they're a little bit more risky just because of the nature of the asset class. There are different altcoins that pop up here and there. And have a long-term outlook and understand the 4-year cycles, because you can play the 4-year cycles, buy the bear market bottom and sell the euphoria bull market phase. But you can also say, hey, I'm going to hold this for 10 years. I don't necessarily need the cash right now. And Bitcoin, we've seen, has appreciated cycle after cycle, higher highs, higher lows. But if you want to play the 4-year cycle, that works too. The other aspect is this market is very volatile, but you can use that volatility to swing trade and make some nice returns. And look, it took me a few years to learn that by reading the charts, understanding the Fibonacci models, understanding Elliott wave theory. So once you understand the charts or you follow a good analyst who's tracking these things, you can buy that swing low and then sell the swing high. And that's, I think, before the volatility used to scare me and I hated it. Now I love it because I'm using it.
Yeah, if you know what you're doing, you can definitely use that to your advantage. And I feel like that's one of the pieces. You mentioned Ethereum, and so many people have been talking, ETH Denver's coming up. We'll be out there. But I feel like so many people have mentioned, Bitcoin generally builds its dominance. It becomes a larger piece of the market. And then we've seen this before. Ethereum starts to pump after as people look for, a higher beta exposure to crypto. They want to see what's going to come next. And, we've talked a lot about the Bitcoin ETFs. Next, a lot of people are looking to May for the ETH ETFs. You've had a lot of bold calls on this interview already, Tony. I wonder if you got another one because, when we look at the ETH ETFs, we had SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce on the show. I know you've talked with her before, and tried to get her expectations for that May approval because that's the date to watch. It seems like a coin flip right now. I don't know if you have an expectation that that's going to happen, and then we could potentially see the same move higher for ETH after potentially it gets approved in those trade. I don't know how you're looking at it.
Yeah, great question. And it was actually discussed at the ETF conference that's taking place in Miami. Big topic, right? And here's my thoughts on it. I'm 50-50 as well, because it's what we talked about earlier. What will Gary Gensler and the Biden administration do, right? Will they do a 180, or will Gary go fight in the courts again? He could take another major loss. It's an election year. Does Biden and the administration folks want that? More bad optics, right? Doesn't look good for him. And one of the things we were talking about earlier is they may want the crypto vote. They may also want the campaign donations. The crypto market is raising capital. There is a PAC now, and it has millions in it. So they're going to donate accordingly. So you have that aspect. And it would be very easy for the SEC to approve the Ethereum ETF. They did it with the Bitcoin ETF. They know what to expect. And Ethereum futures are already launched, custody, all these things, the bells and whistles are already in place. So it is 50-50. Sometimes Gary Gensler surprises us, right? He may say, I'm not going to approve anything, and let's go to court. And then we got to battle again, right? I think he's going to lose, but you never know. He might use it as a delay tactic because he just wants to get his kicks in. Him and Elizabeth Warren just want to get their kicks in before they leave, office or whatever. So we'll have to wait and see. But I'm bullish on Ethereum. It's I believe, my third largest holding, and I am anticipating new all-time highs in 2025 for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard some pretty interesting price calls from people that I trust a lot. We've had Fundstrat Sean Farrell on the show, and he's nailed every price call we've ever seen. He got the price of Bitcoin to wrap up 2023 absolutely right. He's called for all-time highs on ETH. He's called for all-time highs on Solana and Bitcoin 125. So I'm excited to see kind of where this momentum continues. I will shout out one more piece of the interviews that we've seen, and we have a clip here from this one. You mentioned the SEC and their views on crypto. Prometheum's such an interesting kind of startup company that has gotten so much attention because they've often been considered like people who are working in cahoots with the SEC to maybe undermine the crypto industry. And you chatted with Aaron Kaplan, the co-CEO of Prometheum, on your podcast, Thinking Crypto, recently. I just want to play a clip of your conversation with him about kind of some of how crypto looks at his company and how, the SEC regulates this space. and then get your reaction on the other side. Take a listen to Tony chatting with Aaron Kaplan on Thinking Crypto.
It seems to be a dichotomy between what you're doing at Prometheum and the rest of the crypto industry. The rest of the folks have gotten Wells notices. We've got lawsuits. You know, for example, look at a lot of these cryptocurrencies as digital asset securities. Other folks do not. There's some of this playing out in the courts. Congress is involved with certain conversations with Chair Gensler, and is regulations being worked on. What is your take on the dichotomy and how this is playing out? And look, it is an election year. I know this is a packed question I'm asking you here. Chair Gensler may not be around if Biden loses, right? So, what is your take on this entire situation?
Who's ever the chairperson of the SEC, whatever the regulations are, will follow.
Mhm.
When we started, it was when Clayton was the chairperson of the SEC,
Right.
and he was a Trump appointee, and essentially he was the one who came out with the special purpose broker dealer release.
Mhm.
So, whatever the regulators say, our whole position has been we'll follow it. That's why it has taken us arguably a long time because regulations weren't clear, and you have to work with the powers that the actual regulators in order to make sure you obtain the licenses if your belief is that's the way to do it compliantly. So who knows which way the wind blows, but whichever way it blows, it usually carries the plane with it.
So there you go. And I'm curious to get what you learned from that interview, Tony, because it was interesting to hear his thoughts, and it's interesting to think about how all of this could change given what happens in November. But I mean, what was your take on that and what regulation means right now for crypto?
Boy, there's so many thoughts I have because on one hand, Aaron did give a great reply to that question where he said, "Look, we'll go wherever the wave goes, right, and we'll adjust accordingly." But we've seen them get special treatment. Certain licenses were issued and they didn't even have a working product live, right? It's ridiculous. While the rest of the industry was hanging in purgatory, like, what are we doing? And Gary Gensler is sending Wells notices like crazy. And one thing that Aaron reiterated, that Chair Gensler said, is digital asset securities. The only person who has used that terminology was Gary Gensler. And when I saw Aaron use that, I was like, okay, I see what's happening here. I think that was his tell, right? He had his good poker face, but that was the tell. He reiterating those statements is why would you even need to say that? You could just say we launch Ethereum custody. So you're essentially trying to say Ethereum is a security. While going back into the previous administration, Bill Hinman said Ethereum is not a security. Now Chair Gensler is not reiterating those statements, right? He's not echoing those statements. So something weird is happening here. I think this is Gary's ace up his sleeve. It's tricky. And look, Aaron was grilled a bit before Congress when they had the hearings last year. So it's weird. It's really weird. On one hand, I get their entrepreneurial vision and goals, but then the SEC and the relationship they have, the terminology they're using, it's just strange.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's kind of felt the same way. And look, I've been covering crypto for a while too. I got in the space in 2014, and I understand there's a lot of conspiracy vibes in this space in general, but increasingly, a lot of this stuff has been proven true. I mean, like you could have said, there's a conspiracy around the government really wants to shut down crypto banking, but that was very real. I mean, that happened.
Absolutely.
And you can say, there's a conspiracy here against the SEC trying to work to call these things securities and, fighting. And we've seen time and time again that a lot of the conspiracy, quote unquote, has been proven true. So I don't think we're crazy. And I don't know if you felt less crazy the longer you've been doing this or more crazy. It depends really, I guess. But nonetheless, that's where we are, I guess.
Yeah. And look, I from talking to different people, both in the government, investors, TradFi folks, securities lawyers, legal experts, this whole thing, Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler, while they may seem like they have their own agenda and there's something strange happening, I think this just goes back to the government establishment. They're trying to slow this down. They're not trying to kill it because look at the two things that are happening in parallel. BlackRock, Fidelity, and all these folks have a Bitcoin ETF. Coinbase and these folks are getting sued in in court, how can these two things exist at the same time? Why isn't Fidelity getting a Wells notice, right? So you see clear incumbents are okay. They're launching their services and they're doing their thing. PayPal launches stablecoin. They're offering crypto trading. And yet the crypto startups, the exchanges, the ones that grew out of the ground that started the asset class, they're the ones getting attacked. And part of it is we want to take over this asset class. We want to
Hmm.
control. It goes back to what I was saying. Where is the fiat currency going when it goes to a stable coin? It becomes a stable coin. They are very afraid of that because money is the last lever they have to control people and to control and keep the government in place. Now, there's a whole other conversation to have about economics and finance and the money printing, right?
Yeah.
We are in an incredible debt that we're in right now. What's going to happen in the future? But they are afraid of losing power. I think it comes down to that. So they're trying to slow it down. They'll get the regulations in place. Their incumbent TradFi buddies are taking it over. And one of the things I'm still struggling with a bit, as bullish as it is, the Bitcoin ETFs are great. They're very bullish. But now they're in a wrapper where the government, the SEC, can now view everything. They know
Yeah.
how much Bitcoin's coming in, how many is leaving, the total value, all those things, right? They're seeing everything now.
Yeah, and I wonder too. I mean, obviously, the hope is that maybe more people go down the rabbit hole, learn self custody, the importance of that, and then eventually maybe start to see some of that play out. I don't know, but I'm optimistic and just kind of hopefully what's playing out in the excitement can drive people more in that direction. But Tony, I know we only had about 30 minutes here, so I'll leave you the one question because I know you're working on a book tied to the Bitcoin halving. That's obviously coming up not too far away, looking like mid-April. I'm curious to get your thoughts on how this halving could be different. Obviously, one of the worst things you can ever do in the financial space is say this time's different. But I think, weirdly enough, this time actually might be different. So maybe talk to me about the book. Talk to me about your thoughts on the halving and what that means for kind of where prices go this time around.
I am more bullish than I've ever been in this crypto market. And to your point, the halving is coming up, the supply is getting cut, right? The rewards, the mining difficulty will increase, but there's more demand for Bitcoin. Before it was the early adopters, the cypherpunks and so forth, right? Retail. Now Wall Street is here. They want it. And just look at the Bitcoin ETF inflows, right? Incredible after 4 to 5 weeks. And because of that growing demand and the supply getting cut in less and less, and once again, the mining difficulty becomes difficult, you're going to have a supply demand shock. And I know we've heard this in different cycles, but I think it's even greater now because once again, the allocation of capital will be moving from TradFi over to Bitcoin and other crypto assets. So incredibly bullish. And the book essentially talks about this, the fall of FTX, and essentially from SBF to ETF. And that is how the industry changed after that collapse and where we're going, essentially telling the past, present, and future of crypto and what the ETFs mean, crypto regulations, the legal battles with the SEC, and why all of these things have been taking place. And, it also provides some investment tips. So how to navigate the crypto market, right? What are the things to watch out for? What are the pitfalls? So folks can walk away with a clear list of, okay, I better watch out for that pump and dump scam, right? If I'm researching a token, what do I need to look for? It includes a lot of educational aspect to it.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I'm excited for the book, and it was excited to have you on today. Hopefully, we can do this a number of times before the book comes out in April. The founder and host of Thinking Crypto, the podcast. Everyone, if you're not following Tony, go ahead and do that. Go check out his podcast. Great interviews, great insights. Tony Edward, thank you so much for coming on, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Zach. It was great to be here.
All right, that's going to do it for us this time. We'll see you again, everybody. Thank you for listening. We'll see you again soon. Head to Coinage.media for the latest. Thanks, guys.